Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Heroes of the Storm is the game. And this is my first day one build for Medivh. I'm calling it the Portal Medivh build, and as you might suspect based on that name, this build is really about emphasizing the power of Portal for Medivh. You can use Portal in a lot of different ways, but essentially this allows you to set up team fights, buff your allies, gives you a lot of extra utility in a fight, and sets you up to essentially control the battlefield in various ways. Between your Raven form, between portals moving allies left and right and all over, between your portal actually buffing your allies as well, between the crowd control and silence effect of your ultimate, between your shield. Essentially, this version of Medivh has his hands on every given aspect of a fight at any given moment and can always influence and help his teammates out, particularly when using Portal. So if you're playing this build, again, I haven't had a ton of time to play it. This is a day one build, so this is what I think is going to be good. It's a little bit theorycraft, a little bit practice. I have played a couple games with this build, but essentially, you might even have to educate your team, particularly if Medivh is still new and if you're just learning him and nobody knows quite how he works just yet, that your portal has benefits more than just movement. So sometimes just casting your portal to set up buffs is valuable, even if you don't care about the actual movement aspects as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and actually jump into the talents real quickly so you understand what I'm talking about. Level 1 is Portal Mastery, level 4 is Mage Armor, level 7 is Raven Familiar, level 10 is Polybomb, level 13 is Quickening, level 16 is Reabsorption, and level 20 is Invisibility. So that's the build, but let's talk about these in a little bit more detail, how they influence the fight, how to utilize these talents, how to play them all together, and make sure you take full advantage of the portal synergies that exists in this build. So up first is Portal Mastery. This takes your portal, which typically, whenever you cast the portal by default, there's one version where you cast it, and there's another that just spawns immediately at Medivh's side. So you have to be where you want your portal to go. But with Portal Mastery, you can actually load up a portal just about anywhere and walk away, and frankly walk really far out of range, and cast the second half of the portal and make the connection. So this allows you to do a couple things differently and gives you a lot more flexibility. You can load up a portal and you can wait until, so you could set it at an objective 30 seconds before the objective pops, and then when you come back, you can finally use that portal and cast it where your allies might be and set up ganks and do cool, positioning tricks and maneuvers essentially. So a lot of flexibility there, plus it allows Medivh to kind of stay out of the fight. Like, if you want to place a portal near your allies and help them move across the battlefield, you don't have to be right next to your allies to do it. You can move around, you can cast it from far away. So essentially this just gives you a lot more flexibility with where and when and how you utilize your portal, which is important when you want to be kind of that support / utility character that this build emphasizes. So pretty powerful talent. Moving on to level 4, it's Mage Armor. Using a portal grants block. So this is the first of many ways that our portal benefits our allies regardless of its movement abilities. So there are instances where just using a portal is going to be good for our teammates and for Medivh himself. It essentially is going to give you some buffs and upgrades that makes you much better as soon as you exit the portal, regardless of where you're moving or why you want to move through the portal. So Mage Armor gives you block. That means you block 3 basic attacks, or at least you cut their damage in half. That block only lasts for 5 seconds, so it's really best utilized when Portal is either getting you in or out of a fight, essentially. If you're maybe trying to stay alive, you can absorb a little extra damage. If you're trying to make a hard engagement, then whoever walks through that portal first has a higher likelihood of survival. And frankly, everybody that walks through that portal has a little bit more health and damage mitigation, essentially, thanks to Mage Armor. So it's really good for starting fights or going into dangerous territory without getting yourself killed. Level 7 is a similar kind of talent, but it's instead of defensive in nature, this one is offensive. It's Raven Familiar. Now when you walk through a portal, you get essentially what is a new buff that is applied. A Raven will be applied to any hero that walks through a portal. So we can actually just go ahead and see this in action, right? we'll get a little Raven familiar flying around us here. Now the next time we make an auto attack, and this Raven stays at our head for a little while, at least while the portal is up, but the next time we make an auto attack, we actually are going to... Oh, we didn't actually walk through the portal. I'm messing up my example here. Let me do this the correct way and see this in action, right? So now as soon as we pop out of that portal and we make an auto attack, that Raven will dive for an additional 250 damage. So if you get your team organized and you're able to pull that off, and 5 people come through that portal and instantly attack the same target, that's 1,250 damage, thanks to the talent Raven Familiar. So I like that this essentially gives you kind of a passive buff to your allies when they move through portals. That can be a huge advantage when jumping into a fight, can help them get out of trouble. If they're like in a duel, for instance, they need just a little bit of extra damage. It allows Medivh to make an impact without being present, because he is a little bit squishy and he doesn't always want to be right in a fight. So utilizing, you know, stuff like your Force of Will, damage mitigation, the Mage Armor, the Raven Familiar, suddenly when your team is walking through portals, they become superheroes of sorts. They can do more damage, they can absorb more hits, they just get a little bit better. It essentially allows Medivh to act as an influencing agent in a fight without being there himself. And since Medivh doesn't have a ton of damaging abilities or great auto attack or tons of health, he doesn't necessarily want to be in a fight all the time. Sometimes he might want to be floating around as a Raven. So this is a nice way for Medivh to have an influence sort of passively behind the scenes, which fits Medivh's lore and character pretty well, if I do say so myself. Up next at level 10 is Polybomb. This is your heroic ability, of course. You cast it and it polymorphs an enemy hero, which turns them into a nice cute little floating sheep, and they have this cool circle around them, and whenever that sheep explodes or disappears, anyone who's standing in that circle on the enemy team will be transformed into a sheep himself, and essentially have a nice little chain of polymorphed sheep happening. Leyline Seal is okay, but it's much longer cooldown. It's somewhat harder to utilize. It's maybe better among extremely organized play, but Polybomb is great against disorganized opponents that don't quite know how to handle it, or in tight, cramped spaces where they can't avoid it. Plus, it's just a silence on a 40-second cooldown, which isn't that bad at all. Even if it only hits one hero, sometimes it's enough to make a big play. So Polybomb's a pretty fantastic heroic. It makes Medivh a very scary opponent and threat. Level 13 is Quickening. This reduces Portal's cooldown by 50%. As you might imagine in this build, it's the Portal Medivh build after all. We do have a lot of Portal synergies, so reducing the cooldown from 20 to 10 seconds is really substantial. That means you're just able to get out the Raven Familiar and Mage Armor buffs all that much more often. So that's pretty useful, and 20 seconds is not necessarily a bad cooldown because you won't always be in fights and always be doing stuff. But this allows you to use your portal a little more liberally. You don't have to wait for the exact right moment. If you get it wrong, you probably can do it again in 10 seconds to get it right. So sometimes it's worth it just as Medivh himself, right, to just get the buffs and cast Portal for himself at level 13 sometimes. Like just the extra 250 damage in the block might make the difference while laning against an opponent or trying to escape a duel, that kind of thing. So pretty fantastic utility there. Moving on to level 16 is the talent Reabsorption. Upon expiration, Force of Will, that's our W shield ability, heals the target for 50% of the damage that it absorbed. So this in many ways makes Force of Will kind of like a mini Divine Palm from Charism. So it can prevent lethal damage or prevent any damage at any point, and essentially gives your target a second and a half of survival that's guaranteed, and then at the end it will also heal them. So it's kind of like a Divine Palm. They go into stasis when they die, and then they heal up for a large amount. Now, it won't always be a large amount because it is only 50% of the damage taken, and often heroes can't take that much damage in a second and a half. So it's not going to heal for 1,000 or 2,000 like a Divine Palm would, but it does essentially give your allies a second lease on life in many ways. So you can use it to kind of supplement true support on your team, fill up a tank that takes a lot of burst damage, making a hard engagement. Not only does it save a fleeing ally who's about to die, but it gives them a few more seconds perhaps because they do absorb that damage and heal up afterwards. So it's kind of like twice as strong in many ways. So Enduring Will is also pretty solid here, and it's a very viable alternative, but I think Reabsorption just gives you a little bit more and makes it harder to predict for opponents exactly what's going to happen. Like with Enduring Will, they can essentially kind of just wait it out, but with Reabsorption, if they mess up or you're very good and cast it at exactly the right moment, then you get both the mitigation and the return. With Enduring Will, you only ever get the mitigation, so I think Reabsorption gets a slight benefit over Enduring Will in this case, and that's why it makes this build. Plus, of course, we've got a nice green Medivh theme going with a handful of green talent choices, so it's only fitting. And then finally, at level 20, we're actually going to choose Invisibility. This is obviously a support/utility Medivh that's about enabling your allies. So maybe not the best quick match build on that note, but with better players in higher tiers of Hero League, it definitely gets stronger, and Invisibility is another way for you to do that consistently. Arcane Brilliance is a fantastic talent that has a very powerful effect. But the problem with Arcane Brilliance is that it's just really hard to get everybody together to utilize it, and it has a very long cooldown as well. So you have to have an organized team that knows how and when to utilize it, and right now in Medivh's lifespan, that seems very unlikely for a while. And Invisibility you can still use consistently and predictably, right? You can cast it, and the hero instantly knows that they've benefited from it, and they can take advantage of that. So you can use it on tanks to set up sneaky engagements. You can set it on melee assassins to dive back lines unexpectedly. You can use it on Medivh himself sometimes to make sneaky escapes. There's all kinds of different things that Invisibility allows you to set up, and potentially even right in a stealth composition, you could have something like 4 stealth heroes, because this does have 2 charges. So your whole team could just sneak through a portal almost, right, and get all these fancy buffs and just dive on the enemy team unknowingly and unexpectedly, and just blow them up before they ever even realized what happened. So pretty cool talent here that balances out some of the team benefits of the portal stuff, but gives you some individual buffs as well. So there's a world where you can just use portals to buff one butcher or something who dives on the enemy team, and suddenly he's very resilient thanks to block, he's doing extra damage thanks to Raven Familiar, they don't even see him thanks to Invisibility, and you can keep him alive and heal him with Reabsorption. So, and you can do that every 10 seconds thanks to Quickening. So you can see how all this stuff starts to come together and make Medivh pretty crazy. And I think Medivh's a really strong hero, but only in the right team, in the right setting, and particularly in Team League or somewhere where you have voice comms, you can set stuff up. It's a little harder in the chaos of Quick Match or Hero League, but this build still allows you to kind of lead your allies' hands in many ways. Like if you cast a portal and it's going somewhere they want to go, they more or less have to go through it, right? Or they're going to go through it, and they're going to get those buffs whether they like it or not. So it doesn't necessarily rely on organized and smart play. You can kind of just make things happen because they're there, and that's the best way to play Medivh right now, in my mind, particularly for a vast majority of average everyday players. So that's it for the Portal Medivh build. So far it seems to be working. Who knows if it's good? Again, this is a day 1 build. So take my advice, try the build out. If it's working for you, maybe it's the best build, but probably as we play more Medivh games and we see him in the metagame, this will probably not be the final form of Medivh for myself or many other players. So do keep that in mind and be willing to change these talents to find a good fit for yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.